Okay, looks like we have a quorum and folks have filtered in. So I have a couple slides here, but we'll go through those quickly. And I figured mostly it could just be a Q&A. So whatever questions people have, just feel free to jump on in or post them in the office hours chat. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my personal CTA journey and kind of how I got here. Uh, so just who am I? A couple quick facts about CTA, how I prepared, and then jump into Q&A. So I originally started my career as a web developer. And I know this is, a common question that people have around, do you need to be a developer to become a CTA? And the answer unequivocally is no, right? In fact, the person who coached me, Sebastian Wagner, he's not a developer, and he kind of started out as a Salesforce admin. So in my career, I started as a web developer. I've been doing Salesforce consulting since 2009, mostly at Silverline, where I lead the Architect Academy to kind of help grow our, architecture skills and team at Silverline. I also live in Brooklyn, New York, and if there's two things I'm as good at as Salesforce, it would be skiing and board games. So a couple of just quick facts about CTA, which I think I've had a lot of people ask about this type of stuff. There's around 300 to 400 CTAs worldwide. The exact number is not published anywhere, and it's not something Salesforce publishes, but just, from internet sleuthing and kind of how quickly I know they can run the review board, that's likely around where we are. There's slightly under half are at Salesforce, right? In fact, I think it's maybe like significantly under half at this point. And most of the rest are at consulting companies. For a variety of reasons, it ends up being much more common and easier to get your CTA if you work in consulting. So just a couple of interesting things about the review board. If you're preparing for CTA and you've seen a lot of the blogs that people are writing, you'll see a lot of stuff around time management and how much you need to focus on that. And I think that's still an important aspect, but they've actually increased the prep time by an hour. It used to be 2 hours long instead of 3. And I think that makes a huge difference. So I think time management is still important, but it's probably much less of a focus now than it used to be. Virtual boards, if you didn't know, they're offering virtual CTA boards, so you don't need to travel to San Francisco or New York anymore, which is really nice. And the other thing is pass rates, right? Again, this is something Salesforce doesn't publish, but historically, most people don't pass the first time. And I could say for myself, when I took it about 3 or 4 years ago, I did not pass, and it basically decided to retake it. It took me 3 years before I felt I was really ready to retake it. And if you're far along the path and you think, hey, I'm pretty close, I want to start scheduling the review board or something like that, I would strongly encourage you to take the CTA 602 Diagnostic Workshop. It's basically like a mock review board with a Salesforce CTA judge who'll give you real pointed feedback around how you're doing. Okay, how did I prepare? Right, I think the usual online resources. Architect Trailblazer community has all the links you could want. Every single file in Architect Trailblazer community is basically worth a look. Ladies Be Architect is really the best online group for all kinds of reading materials and mocks and things like that, and just also the Salesforce CTA Master Trail Mix. There's a lot of links there and everything, but really 95% of what you want and the information you need to prepare is within these 3 resources. The other piece is consulting. Uh, I think it's very, very hard, unlike the rest of the Salesforce exams, to just cram for CTA. It is an experiential based exam, and if you don't have the project experience, if you haven't seen just all kinds of different Salesforce orgs with all kinds of issues, and all kinds of projects, it's very, very hard to take and pass the exam. So you just need the real hands-on experience. For myself, it was also really helpful that, I worked at a company that's full of, Salesforce experts and consulting experts who were able to mentor me. And I was also able to collaborate very effectively with, my team and my fellow architects going for the CTA. And I think Gillian Reynolds, who's also one of my fellow coworkers and CTAs at Silverline, is on here on this stream. So that was really useful. The hardest thing about going for CTA is staying motivated and like forcing yourself to keep studying and going through it because it's a process, and just having people around you who support you is huge. Um, Executive exposure, uh, communication's a big part of it, right? They're expecting you to be able to talk to a CIO, CTO, and sell Salesforce and explain Salesforce and explain your rationale, and just forcing yourself to get up and present in front of executive stakeholders and folks like that is very helpful. And the last thing I want to call out, uh, and this was extremely helpful for me, and something I cannot recommend highly enough, um, is Sebastian Wagner's Flow Republic course. Um, he's been doing this for some time now, and I went through it, and as well as my coworker Gillian. I mean, it's hugely helpful to really prepare with somebody who knows what they're looking for, who's helped other people prepare, has a study plan, and to do mock scenarios with a real CTA. If you can get your employer to pay for it, it is 100% worth it. Okay, and with that, I'll bring it over to Q&A. And, I'm always happy to chat about this stuff. So if we don't get to your question, don't hesitate to shoot me a line at Greg at Silverline. So I think the first question's from Salb. How much did... Yeah, that's a great question. How much did my solution design and how I would architect something change in those 3 to 4 years? Um, So it changed in some ways and not in others. Salesforce is a larger platform now than it was 3 to 4 years ago, right? There's all kinds of new APIs and capabilities that they expect you to leverage. But the CTA exam is not looking for you to use like the latest and greatest, shiniest new features. Like, I would not expect too many people are using Salesforce Evergreen as part of their CTA solution, or necessarily even using CDC or things like that. What they really want you to know inside and out is core Lightning platform, right? Anything that might come up on any of the previous architect exams, and kind of your rationale as to why you would use those things, and sales, service, and community cloud. You need to know those backwards, forwards, and inside out. I don't think that too many of their scenarios are really trying to use, Einstein machine learning or things like that. Now, if you do have a good fit for it, you can certainly propose it. But be warned that, anything that you propose as part of your solution, they may ask you questions about. So, question from Universal Containers, is it necessary to have development skills experience to become a TA? So I would say no. It's definitely not required to know how to code to be a TA. They're not going to ask you to read code or write code. However, you do need to know the platform to a high degree of depth from a technical perspective. You need to know how it's working under the hood to know, like, for example, for large data volumes, what is data skew really mean? What does ownership skew mean? Why is that generally a bad thing for databases? Not just Salesforce. When you talk about integrating with an API, you need to be able to really walk through almost to a UML sequence diagram level of, okay, I have an integration. So what does that look like? There's an HTTP request, and then we get an HTTP response, and then based on that response, we do this, and so on. So while you don't need to know how to code, um, you do have to have a deep technical knowledge of the Salesforce platform. So Mac Mouse asks, "How has your life changed after getting CTA?" That's a good question. I don't think it's changed that much. It's very nice for me from a credibility perspective. A lot of times I would have to make quite a few arguments about architecture, either with the client's enterprise architects or Salesforce or other folks. So now, when I walk in, I just have a default amount of credibility. I do get a lot of recruiter spam, but I think, like most people in the industry, in Salesforce, I think that's just kind of a constant thing. I can't say that I've noticed a real difference there. But I mean, for me, it's just, it was something that I wanted to get more for myself almost than anything else, because I've been doing Salesforce for 11 years now. And it's just something I really wanted to kind of show that I could do it.
Hey, Greg. Hey, guys. Gillian. I was just going to add something on that. I think it goes along with the credibility you said, but for me, it's just confidence as well. So, if I'm architecting a solution for a client, the ecosystem is so huge that CTA sort of made me learn all the bounds of it. So I feel like when I am now solving for a problem, I feel more confident that there's not some, shadowy corner of the ecosystem that I'm not aware of that I'm maybe missing, and that like I actually kind of know what I have to work with, and I'm, making decisions appropriately. So.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, it forces you to just like know everything about the Lightning platform, where you're not going to feel like, maybe I should be doing something, this way. Like you know what the options are, and the drawbacks and pros and cons of those options. So one question was, how much did it impact your actual architecting ability? I mean, it absolutely did improve my architect abilities, and it has changed how I do projects. Um, that's actually one of the things I really enjoyed about studying for CTA versus some of the other exams. It's really not like a memorization test. They want you to be able to just architect effectively and to be able to explain your rationale for things, and how you got to the right solution. It's not just about having the right answer. So it's changed how I create artifacts for my project, which artifacts I create. It's changed, the types of questions I ask in discovery. It's definitely learned a lot during the process. So one question was with regards to sales service community, is it greater than 50% of the knowledge you need to know in terms of Lightning Core platform? I would say probably not. It's If we just talk about Lightning platform, it's close. You have to really know those data models inside and out for Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, and so on. You have to be able to like use the appropriate standard objects or explain why you didn't use them. For communities, you need to know all the various community specific sharing capabilities, the differences between license types and things like that. Um, but I wouldn't say it's more than 50%, because you still need to know all the rest of the overall platform functionality, right? Like all the various Salesforce integration options, APIs, sharing, all that, right? But just those three clouds are always going to be part of the scenario, one or more of those three clouds. So you have to know them inside and out.
And I would say community is pretty much always, you're always going to have a community. I don't think there's been a CTA scenario where there isn't. So I would count on community, and then, either sales or service or both coming into play for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I see there's a couple more questions around coding, and I mean, Gillian, maybe you could chime in on this as well. But I really don't think you have to be a developer to take and pass the CTA, and in fact, I would venture to say that like less than 50% of the people who do are coming from a software development background. I think a lot of them are coming from, an enterprise IT background, or they're a Salesforce admin who kind of grew their skills over the years. And it is very technical. You have to be able to draw UML sequence diagrams of things. You have to be able to explain, okay, here's a Salesforce limit, right? What is the reason why this limit is there? right? Which just requires having a very good mental model of things, but you do not have to read or write code.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I would just, yeah, it is very technical. I mean, down to, exactly the sequence, what is, calling the Apex controller, and then what is that controller doing, or is it a trigger, and, when is your integration running? So you absolutely have to know all the impacts and how that works. But, similar to Dev 1, obviously at a more advanced level, but you don't have to know how to write the code, but you certainly need to understand all of the technical details of how those elements work together, and where where you can't do things, or where it's going to cause problems if you do it a certain way.
Yeah. So there's a question: what does my day-to-day job look like, and what has my kind of career arc been like? Mostly, I mean, I've been in Salesforce consulting since I started working on Salesforce since 2009. And I started as a developer, and then started leading projects as an architect. And, kind of, I think at this point, I've played most every role you can play on a Salesforce project team. Um, and so it's just like that variety of experience of just seeing, tons and tons of projects and clients and seeing all kinds of different Salesforce orgs, and, having the experience of like when things go sideways and how do you deal with that is a big part of what they're looking at in the exam. In terms of my day job, I do a lot of meetings. Uh, you know, the sales team loves to come and bring me in and say, look, we have a CTA looking at your problem. So that's definitely part of my job. But I still build things, and that's not something I ever really want to give up. Um, so now these days it's mostly building POCs and things like that. Recently, I've been trying to pick up TypeScript a little bit to build some SFDX CLI plugins, and we did that for a hackathon. So I built a little plugin that downloads some custom fields from your org and spits them out into a CSV. But that's kind of just what I do for fun. For my day to day, it is meetings, leading project teams, leading programs, things like that. Yeah, I would say, so there was a question of like, well, what about in-house? If you've been um, kind of owning a complex enterprise Salesforce org, where does that put you for CTA? Um, I think I wouldn't say that the CTA biases towards breadth, because you do need the depth as well. Like you need to know, the platform inside and out. So for example, on the sharing side, you should know every single option Salesforce has to share records and why you would use one versus the other, and you should know like, okay, what are all the weird intricacies of how accounts and contacts and opportunities and cases and assets and all those kind of standard objects get shared, um, from a Salesforce perspective. But it's just hard to get to that, for me at least, without hands-on building it. So if your org, for example, doesn't use Service Cloud, or doesn't use certain standard objects, um, you're just going to have to need to take the time to like really get into the nitty gritty with those yourself. Um, Personally, I can't learn anything without actually, playing around with it in a Trailhead org and building it. So I didn't know anything about knowledge, and I've even never used like knowledge articles or any of that stuff. And it can come up in the exam, so that was something where I built out a whole fake, knowledge system in a Trailhead org to learn that.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, my background prior to joining Silverline was in-house, and that was where I started with Salesforce. So, I don't think it's like strictly necessary that you have been a consultant for X number of years. However, if you haven't, to Greg's point, if you have been in a sales, cloud organization, you haven't really used service, then it just comes back to you to put in the work, and make sure that you have both the breadth and the depth. I mean, I think that's really challenging part of CTA is it's not one or the other. It truly is both. And that just, it's a lot of work to make sure you're prepared on all of those things, but it's certainly doable. I mean, I did it. There were a lot of service features that, I hadn't actually hands-on implemented in a project environment. And, to Greg's point, I studied the material, did them hands-on, built them out, and just made sure that I was as comfortable as I could possibly be with, what those use cases were and how they work. So it's doable. You just might have to put in more work.
Yeah. How much time, Julian, if you had to put a number on it, and I'm almost afraid to answer this for myself because it's going to be so high, but if you were to put a number on, the amount of time you spent studying.
I'm trying to remember. I kept track of it in a spreadsheet every time, and I think I added it up, and it was. Do you know what yours was? I mean, I feel like it came up to like 120, but I also feel like it had to be more than that. But I did it in 3.5 months. I mean, really, from the time we started with Sebastian till when I took my exam was pretty short. So I crammed a lot in a short amount of time.
Yeah. I feel like that's interesting. I feel like I was, if I add up Sebastian and all the time I spent on my own and all that, I feel like I'm probably around 500 hours.
Yeah.
I wasn't keeping a great track of this.
It was definitely, though, it was, 2+ hours most days. I tried to keep a 5 to 6 day schedule. Staying motivated and structured, I think, is one of the challenges for sure. And if you're doing it over a longer period of time, then maybe you can relax that. But I think that just keeping a structure and not, if you really have a date, I guess, anyway, to just keep that kind of schedule and think of it as sort of a second job almost. I mean, I had to do that and like schedule time. I'm going to get off work at this time and I'm going to do 2 hours, and this is what I'm going to do this day.
Yep. So, a couple questions came up. What's next on your career goals? That's an excellent question that I don't have an answer for. Actually, I was planning to take 2020 and kind of relax, though I think like for everyone else, 2020 had somewhat different plans. But I plan to stay with Salesforce and stay in the Salesforce ecosystem. One thing I've been lucky enough at my company is when I started we were pretty small, around 12 people or so, and we've grown a lot. So I've had the opportunity. I've had the opportunity to wear a lot of different hats. Right now I'm managing some folks and leading our developer academy and architect academy. So those are two of the big things I'm doing now. So someone asked, what's the format of the actual board exam? What were you asked to do? What were you expected to present? So the format is you're given an 8 to 9 page scenario, typically, and you can see some sample scenarios on the Architect Trailblazers community. And then you have to basically come up with the entire solution design and presentation for that scenario. Typically, that's going to include artifacts such as an ERD, a system architecture diagram, define your integration architecture. You basically have to solve for each and every one of the requirements in that scenario. There's no prescribed format. You can present in any number of ways and people do it differently. One thing I would encourage everyone to do is on the Architect Trailblazers community, there's 2 really good links for this. One is the diagramming solution links, which goes to Pluralsight and kind of has a video of some people reading a scenario and kind of mining it for requirements. And then the other is a recording of, I think it's Carl Brundage, giving his CTA exam. And so this is from a while back. So, it's not going to be using the latest features, but that's like a great example of what somebody does. Though I think he draws all the diagrams live, which I would not recommend. I would try and build all that during your prep time. And so Martin asks, do I have a CS degree? I don't have a CS degree. I was a math major. but I really don't think it was that influential towards CTA. Um, I I think there's a lot of different paths really that you can go down to get to go towards CTA. And I think especially if you want to just up your Salesforce architecture exam skills, even just the process of preparing for it is gonna help with that a lot. Uh, how did I gauge when I was ready? I did a number of mock exams. I think doing a mock exam with the CTA who can give you real feedback around where you're at is probably the the most um, the most important thing you can do because it's very, very hard to judge for yourself where you're at. I did tons of mock exams. We did some internally where we were kind of role playing as the review board for each other, but also, the ones I did with Sebastian Wagner from Flow Republic um, were really the ones where I could get very directed feedback on how I was doing and where I needed to improve and things like that.
Yeah, I was just gonna pop. I was gonna have. I mean, it's the same answer, but I was gonna say if you can at all, if you're not with a coaching program like Sebastian, if you can at all connect with a mentor who is a CTA who's been through it, and to kind of experience that Q&A and the kinds of things that you get, pushed on or questioned about, or asked to elaborate on, will really give you a sense of if you are ready. And then I would say the other thing was, this was a benefit of working with Sebastian, one of the benefits of his program. But one thing that you get with the course is a large bank of Q&A questions that cross all, I mean, it's like 100 to 200 or something different sort of questions across all topic areas. And for me, I literally took a spreadsheet and I marked when I thought I could answer each of those questions. And by the time I thought that I could adequately answer each of those, I sort of trusted that I adequately could cover that topic. So that, along with the mocks, for me was really valuable.
So someone asked the question of, if you're at Salesforce, is it easier to pass the CTA? I will say that there's no way that they're like judging the people who work at Salesforce any differently than any other test taker. They have a very strict rubric that they judge people on, and they take the process very seriously. The reason why it is, I think, easier for people at Salesforce is number one, I'm pretty sure that they're not charging themselves the review board fees. So you can kind of, not have to pay to take it. Um, and number two, they have a lot of development programs to get people prepared for CTA. Especially if you're in the program architect group, they really encourage you to go for it. And I think, they'll like hook you up with somebody who can maybe help you a little bit like other CTAs. But the actual review board process is going to be exactly the same for somebody who's an employee of Salesforce or someone who's not. It's just easier for them to take it logistically more than anything, I would say. So there's a question around, would you recommend spending some time consulting to get exposed to different requirements? So, I mean, as Gillian said, it's not, a prerequisite or anything like that, but it does help tremendously. One of the areas that they ask about in the exam is governance and project lifecycle. So, some of the scenarios will have things like around how do you run a global go live? How do you, run a UAT across multiple countries in different time zones? How do you manage different development teams? Um, and it's just hard to really answer that question without having had that type of experience. Um, if you're, part of a company that has like a large Salesforce program with, many ongoing initiatives and, different teams working on Salesforce and things like that, I think you can get some of that same experience. But definitely, program management and governance, and just what a typical project lifecycle looks like is part of the exam. Someone asked, what project have I built that you like or that you are most proud of? Um, that's a hard one to answer because there's like a couple that I really like. But my favorite one was probably for a forex trading company. So like people who are trying to trade currencies and things like that. This was before Salesforce Communities, and they were building a very sophisticated portal on Salesforce for their retail traders, and it needed to work across about like 80 different countries and 15 different languages, and with the combination of translation workbench and a lot of custom labels, and some custom objects, it actually worked really, really well. And it was something that they were lacking in their previous system. So that was a fun little project. So there's a question: are any of the exam questions about your personal experience? No, there's nothing really. They're trying to make it as objective as possible. So you're going to present the for the scenario for 45 minutes, right? And then the Q&A for 40 minutes is purely just about your solution and how you answered various things in the scenario, or if you missed requirements, they're going to call out those. They have like a pretty strict rubric that they're following, and they're not trying to remove any elements of subjectivity from the process. Right. So a couple questions around Flow Republic. We did Silverline pay for it? Yes. That was one of the nice benefits, I think, of working for a consulting company. There's a lot of value for consulting companies in having CTAs working there from a branding perspective and marketing, and all that of it. If you're um, if you're kind of on the step where you want to start preparing for the review board, if you have system architect and application architect, and you feel like I know, like, I could take any of those exams and kind of like not worry about passing again, and if you really want to start seriously preparing for review board, there's some other courses I think he has that are separate from the CTA course, but that would kind of be the line where I say,
Yeah,
one
I
you
was
should
gonna say,
take.
I agree. There's some other courses to see what he has now. I think like an architect fast track or something that might help you get to the point of being ready for CTA. But the other thing that we did, that I thought was helpful, was Sebastian has, I think he's still offering it at least, was the CTA assessment. And Greg and I both took that along with a couple other folks from Silverline. And you kind of do a very short mock and a presentation, and Sebastian will kind of help to tell you whether he believes you are ready. So there is a cost with that, obviously, but it's much less than the full course. So that could be worth looking into as well to
Yeah.
try to assess that.
And in terms of years of experience, it's hard to give an answer to this. In the Salesforce exam guide, they say 8 years of experience, I think, of Salesforce. But I think it really depends on what you were doing in those years, right? If you are on a variety of projects or programs and like have seen all kinds of things, then I think you can kind of short circuit some of that. So it really depends, I think, on the environment you're in, and if you're kind of learning all the various nooks and crannies of the platform, and you're constantly being challenged to kind of um, present your architectural solution and reviewing it with people and things like that. So there's a question: are there any specific assets that you find valuable in colleagues that fill admin, dev, and consultant roles? And Gillian, I'll kick this over to you as well. I don't look for specific skill sets, generally speaking, for team members, right? I would say it's more around attitude. And, if you're on a project with people, I think the most important thing is having a team that, really works effectively together, and everybody's kind of like wants the team to succeed. Because if somebody has a certain knowledge gap or, isn't familiar with something, that can be solved, right? Like there's all kinds of training, and that's a very solvable issue. But if somebody doesn't have a great attitude or isn't willing to put in the work, that's a much harder item to fix on a project.
Yeah, I mean, same. It's not really any particular skill or anything for me, and this isn't really about me being a CTA. This is
Yeah.
something that's been important to me just as an architect, along the way. But is just a sense of kind of ownership. Being willing to. I mean, it goes hand in hand with what Greg said, right? Attitude, being part of a team, but having a sense of ownership over. What tasks you're given, and I will say one other thing that is super important, and I think that it takes some time, but in no matter what role, I think is super important, which is somewhat of big picture thinking, right? And not tunnel vision of I just need to build this one thing, but just understanding why I'm building that thing and what role it plays in the project, so that we're all sort of working towards the same goal, and looking out for potential pitfalls and things like that. So it's all I would say more again, like soft skills. It's not any like specific technical thing, because like, as Greg said, that's going to vary for everyone.
So another question was, what are some new skills I picked up during the CTA journey that I value and how I apply them? So a good number. I mean, I would say number one. There's a quote by one of the master instructors from Salesforce that like one of the habits is that you have to think fast and think correct, which was not a skill that I had. Which I like to take my time and really do some research and do analysis before I come back to, a client with an answer about stuff. But the skill that CTA helped me develop is really to have a mental flow chart in my head for all kinds of different solution scenarios, to be able to basically answer immediately, like, okay, it's this, then we got to go, bulk API, or this is like a Salesforce Connect option, or this is how we should do the sharing. So those like mental flow charts to be able to think through problems quickly, and just kind of ask the necessary questions. That was very helpful. I'd say it's tightened up all my artifacts, all the design artifacts that I create a lot. Um, I have a very consistent format now for how I make system architecture diagrams and integration architecture diagrams, process flows. And I was pretty loose with this kind of stuff, but it just forces you, the practice and just doing it over and over forces you to get really, really tight about how you make those. Those are two big skills. Trying to think what else. I mean, you know, there's just a lot that if you come into it with the mindset of like, I'm not studying to pass the review board. I'm studying to just learn as much as I can about Salesforce and become a better architect. I think for me, it was almost more of a mindset shift than anything of, just kind of making me more open and interested in learning this kind of stuff. And it was definitely a humbling experience for me preparing for CTA.
I would second everything you said. I mean, obviously, there's, and I don't think this is probably what you were asking. So, I mean, I think Greg's answer was, a really good one, and all of that applies to me. But then, obviously, of course, there was tons of like technical, I mean, things that, I thought I knew Salesforce sharing before I studied for CTA, and I realized, there were a lot of things about sharing that I didn't know as well as I thought I did. So, I mean, tons of stuff like that. But certainly, I think just the architect mindset, right? Architect way of thinking. And I think I did a lot of that, but I certainly improved, and I guess became more where that's more my default way of thinking about something, rather than thinking about like the minute detail of something, thinking about it as kind of all the aspects of a particular problem.
Yeah, it does force you, and I'm a very detail-oriented person by nature. So it does force you to like zoom out a little bit and be able to kind of quickly hone in on, okay, this is the right architecture to solve the problem. And I can fill in the details as we go. there's questions I missed. Has the CTA cert boosted your salary? Yes. I mean, certainly, I think just getting a CTA in and of itself, I think this is something where really you need to get your employer on board before you even start the process. I think just because it's such a lot of work, you can't do it without the support of the people around you, and I think that's true both personally and professionally. My roommates were making fun of me because I had a room that was, covered with architecture diagrams and whiteboards, and they called it my beautiful mind room while I was preparing for CTA. But to answer the question, I mean, yeah, it's a very marketable skill. Lots of companies will value it and attach a compensation to it. If you're doing it at your current employer, I would recommend getting them on board early, right? Because it should be an investment on their part as well. It's something that I think is very, very hard to do if all your study time is on nights and weekends and you don't have kind of professional support to do this. So the question was, do I think that should be the eventual end goal? Have I found it to help in my career? And it seems like the employer paid for the cert, which might imply it hasn't actually helped yet. Well, I don't know that I understood the last part of that. I mean, I haven't switched jobs, but I mean, it definitely helped with my employer and getting the raise and all that. And I think in general, it's been helpful for my career in terms of like building a network and kind of building a brand and things like that. How does CTA differ from app architect or system architect? Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think there's two parts to that. Right? There's an application architect and a system architect in terms of like somebody who's passed the Salesforce exams. And at the end of the day, those are multiple choice tests. Like if you put in enough time, just preparing for them, you're gonna pass. So I think there's a really big difference between that and CTA, which is the reviewer style exam, which is just
Yeah, I lost Greg too. I'm pinging him on Slack to see. Let him know.
Oh, do you hear me now? Oh, where did everybody lose me?
We lost audio. We can hear you now, though.
Oh, okay. What
There,
was the
Greg.
last thing people
I think
heard?
we still have lost Greg.
It looks like people can hear me now. I'll just go back, and I don't know when folks lost me, but wonder if it's a Discord issue. Do you guys hear me? So it looks like some folks hear me and some folks don't.
We're
gonna
recording it, and I can hear you,
yeah.
so it'll be on the recording.
Yeah, let's assume it's a Discord issue. Can get it fixed. There's no CTA exam dump. But I will say the scenarios on Architect Trailblazer community, the mock scenarios are quite realistic. So if you look at, especially some of the later ones, those mock scenarios are very, very much like the ones you're going to see on the review board. Right. So application architect and system architect, I would say as an application architect, right, you're more focused on the nitty gritty of what you're building, right? You're really deep in the build work stream. You're the one designing the like really complex custom code piece or like the details of kind of the Salesforce application architecture. But you're probably not worrying as much about the integrations, like the ESB, where it fits into the larger landscape. On the system architecture side, it's the flip side, right? All the systems involved, the data flow between those systems, what, the integration patterns are between them. Kind of why you've selected each system and what the areas of responsibility for each system are, but you don't know, maybe all the intricacies of like how Salesforce application is built and how it's working, right? And the CTA is really bringing those two things together. Where kind of the high level of how all these things are working together and fit in with each other, and also can dive into the details of anything on the Salesforce side.
Yeah, and I would say bringing it, I mean, for sure, it's bringing it all together, showing that those areas and how to leverage the solutions, and then being able to adequately communicate your solution and as well as justify your solution. So, which is a big part of it. Knowing what to do is one thing, and being able to convince the panel that why you made those choices and that those are the right choices is another part.
Yep. Yeah, so there was a question of, did I find out I passed immediately? I was in one of the last people to take it in that kind of cohort. They do it in 1 week or 2 week increments usually. And so I happened to find out very quickly. I found out like within a day or two. So luckily I didn't have to wait too long. I think most people will find out within like 1 to 2 weeks after they take it. And you'll usually get an email or a phone call.
Yeah, I can give my experience. So I actually had a section retake, which I don't know if you guys know how that works. I guess I can just tell you that. So the CTA exam is made up of 6 different sections. In order to pass fully, you have to pass all 6 sections, and you have to have an overall passing score. If you pass 5 out of 6 sections and have an overall passing score, you get what's called a section retake, and they invite you back. It's scheduled sort of ad hoc, so it's in 1 to 3 months, usually after. And you do a shorter scenario, 45 minutes prep time just on that one topic, and your presentation is just focused on that. So timing-wise, I initially found out that I had a section retake 1 week to the day after I took it. I did get a phone call from Suzanne. And then scheduling was a bit weird, so it took longer than I wanted to take my section retake, but I ended up taking it a few months later. And for that one, I had a phone call 20 minutes after I left Salesforce's office that I passed.
So how much weight would I put on the multiple choice certs? Yeah, I mean, I do put weight on them in that it shows somebody's at least invested in the Salesforce ecosystem, in that like they want to build their career on Salesforce. So usually that is a positive signal for me when I'm looking at resumes. But yes, when I see a resume that's like, I have all the certs, but like 1 to 2 years of experience, that does raise some yellow flags in my mind. And usually I'll have a conversation with that person still, and it's usually pretty fast to tell, like, did they just take and pass those exams by studying exam banks and memorizing, or do they actually know the material? I will say I do like the architect exams more than almost any of the other certification exams. I found for even like, back in the day when I was taking admin and like service consultant and sales consultant, I felt like there was a lot of memorization involved. But for the architect exams, I feel like the multiple choice, it's a lot more scenario based questions. And there's still some, just like memorization and details and things, of course, that you need to know. But if you've had the experience, I found a lot of the scenario based questions just, kind of made sense. Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll start from the bottom. Does CTA kind of typecast you into not being an individual contributor? It certainly can, in that some of the areas where kind of your CTA skills can have the greatest impact are on large programs or, complex implementations where you're kind of helping um direct the like overall architecture and design, and there's other folks who are down, actually building the stuff and building lightning web components and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's really, really based on what you want it to do. Like, I mean, Gillian, I know you're still very much in a, an IC role in that, like, you're building, a really complex project now and kind of leading that. So I think it gives you flexibility. Um, but certainly, the path of least resistance is probably to be less of an IC. But if you want to stay in that role as a CTA, you can absolutely do that.
Yeah, I would say I mean, I definitely, Greg was mentioning his day to day. He's doing a lot with the sales team, and I am fully engaged on a client project right now that's been keeping me extremely busy this entire year. So I, have done less kind of pre-sales work than Greg has because of that. But I would say, to Greg's point, that it's kind of based on what you want, right, and where you want to go with it. But like, your first part of the question about requiring greenfield blue sky solution architecture, my current project, is that we're developing a brand new org, migrating their entire business process onto Salesforce, lots of different clouds and features. And that's really my I mean, that's my ideal scenario, right? My ideal type of project that I really want to be on. And so, I mean, the good thing for me as a CTA, I feel like, is that puts me kind of in the front of the line to be able to be the lead architect on those kinds of projects when they're available. So I think I mean, as much as anything, honestly, having CTA kind of just gives you a lot of ability to direct your career and be able to do, take it where you want to go, and doesn't necessarily force you down any one particular path.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, in terms of percentages, I mean, I would really be suffering if I was spending 50% of my time building artifacts and like making, boxes and line diagrams. I mean, it is an important, the reason why I brought it up is it's a really important part of the review board, and you need to have those on lockdown. Um, and certainly, part of my role is I provide design reviews to, ongoing projects we have at Silverline. Um, but in terms of like my day to day, I'm definitely spending uh, significantly less than 50% of my time producing artifacts. Though, a good amount, in what I would call more of an architectural role than an individual contributor. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to, I do make an intentional effort to like keep my dev skills at least somewhat sharp. Like for example, when I grabbed your open source LWC library and got it working and then promptly handed it off to a developer. But it's something where I've personally had to make an intentional effort, just because of my role at the company. But I think it really is up to you, right? If you want to stay in a very hands-on role and capacity and kind of just like stay, as an IC, I think you can absolutely do that with a CTA. It just gives you optionality. So artifacts, by that I mean like a diagram, like for example, an ERD is an artifact. It's all kinds of like diagrams and outputs. Usually design artifact. Yep. Oh, looks like Salve answered it. Well, someone asked, did I celebrate? How did I celebrate? Oh, I remember. I was in San Francisco at the time because I was taking it there. And I had just booked a couple extra days after CTA because I knew if I passed, I would want to like spend a little time relaxing. And if I failed, I would want to spend some time, in my hotel room drinking. And so I did pass, and basically I just, went out with my friends to a new fancy restaurant every night in San Francisco. And it was probably at least a month after CTA before I really came down from like the high of passing. When did I first, and Gillian, how did you celebrate?
Well, I mean, when I first took it, I got a section retake, but I did kind of take that time to decompress because there's some element of just being done with it, and having done the review board and just, but I wouldn't call that a celebration because I didn't know if I passed or not. And then when I took my section retake, this project I'm on now was starting, so I had to fly from Chicago back to New York to go straight into like discovery sessions. So I kind of missed my chance, but I did come back to the office and have lunch with you guys. So I don't know. But I would say it's just more of a, yeah, it wasn't any particular thing I did to celebrate, but like you said, there's just kind of a mental high of like, wow, I really, did it that lasts for a little while. So.
Yep. Yeah. And so the question from Saab was around like pushing into AI and machine learning within Salesforce. One thing I forgot to mention is being a CTA does give you more access to folks at Salesforce. So I have found it useful in getting kind of more direct access to Salesforce product managers. And when I raise like an issue, they're usually more responsive about it. Even though I already, even before CTA was working at a big Salesforce partner, even with that, it still makes a difference from what I can see. You also get some early access and previews to things that they show at Dreamforce and things like that. So there is like some benefit there, but I would agree if you're looking to like get deep into AI and machine learning, there's probably only like a loose connection to CTA. So the question is with how many people have been joining the ecosystem and how much Salesforce is making things clicks not code, how do you see the barrier of entry trending? I think the barrier of entry is actually going up to a degree. Maybe not the barrier to entry, but the barrier to be a good admin, quote unquote.
Yeah, like the ceiling, I think, is going up.
Yeah. It used to be back in the day, like with Salesforce, you had page layouts, you had workflow rules, you had list views, maybe S controls and like a couple other things. And that was basically it. But now, even for admins, I think for me to call somebody a good admin, I'm going to want them to know flow. That's going to be, a pretty big requirement. And that's like basically graphical programming. So not that, easy. I think, the tool set that you're expected to use around SFDX and Git and version control and DevOps and all that stuff, the expectations have increased significantly. For years, Salesforce was very backwards, or the Salesforce ecosystem was pretty backwards when it came to DevOps relative to a traditional, software development lifecycle. But now with SFDX and all that, the bar has been raised, and that means for admins, now you have to be comfortable using and working with all these various, version control tools and all that.
I think we missed one up a little bit, unless you answered it, Greg. But when did you first realize you wanted to be a CTA?
Oh, I don't. That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I've spent so much of my career, the majority of my career in Salesforce. And when they originally came out with CTA, I already had basically gotten every other Salesforce cert or very close. I actually took the CTA multiple choice beta exam. This was before they had the domain exams. And I was like, this multiple choice test was pretty easy. I didn't have a hard time doing it. And I didn't really know what I was getting in for when I took the review board. And I just like completely bombed. And was just, nowhere near ready to take it and pass it. But so it's always been kind of on my list since it first came out. And it was just getting to the point where I had the experience and background and really the time to prepare for it.
I can just tell my experience, I guess, which was when I came to Silverline about 2.5 years ago. So I came from in-house, where I had sort of learned Salesforce by implementing, and I had all my architect certs by the time I came to Silverline. But I really, honestly, all that time thought like, yeah, CTA, it's not for me. Like, I know the top of the pyramid's there, but I'll probably just never do that. Didn't really see the point, to be honest. But kind of all around the same time, like Ladies Be Architect launched, and reading that made me think maybe I should do it. And then around the same time, Greg and then a few others were kind of thinking. We all had our prereqs. We were all kind of considering it, and then Silverline really put some like heavy support behind us. And so I would say once I committed to doing it, I guess is when I really is the first time I can say that I really wanted to become a CTA. Up until that time, it was, I don't know, some reluctance, I guess, and maybe it was just fear of failure. I'm not sure, but it took me a little while to work up to it.
It was, and if it wasn't for you and Chris going for it, I probably could not have motivated myself to go for it again.
Yeah, I don't think I would have done it if like the group hadn't, come to, if it hadn't happened the way it did. I guess I think it's if it's something you're like very motivated for personally, then maybe. But for me, it was a combination of sort of that group, thing happening at Silverline that really helped me push forward.
Yep. Yeah. So, and then there was a question of, do you have a preferred methodology? So I mean, methodology is kind of a broad term. Maybe you can expand on like what you mean by that. I don't know that there's one cookie cutter, project methodology I can ever really apply to a given project. There's always nuances and kind of specifics. It's definitely changed, right? So I would say we're agile, typically agile with some upfront discovery time. But I have, also done waterfall projects where, due to, regulatory or compliance reasons, because of the client's industry, there needed to be a lot of requirements, specification up front, and there was all kinds of, teams and dependencies. So we needed, the giant Gantt chart with like all the different dates and deadlines and all that. But definitely my preference is for Agile. But Agile is also kind of a broad term, right? If you talk to 10 companies, they're going to do Agile 10 different ways. In terms of over engineering a solution, I mean, I think part of being, a really solid architect, is engineering a solution that's going to, meet the requirements and scale that the business needs and that they're likely to need, in the immediate future, but not trying to architect something necessarily that's going to, cost them a lot more to build and be more complicated to maintain and, have all these features and functionality that they don't necessarily need. I'm a big believer in Yagni when it comes to architecture. So you want to architect things to be, as robust and sophisticated as they need to be, but no more. And I think a lot of it is identifying like what you don't need. Yeah, I think that's something that always happens, right? Like there's a one-off feature and then, it becomes something bigger over time. And that happens to me too. That's not going to change, when you become a CTA, right? I always say like the things I say, it's only a matter of time until they're wrong, right? It's only a matter of time until the facts on the ground change and the assumptions I may change, and the solution design that I came up with is no longer applicable. But I think a lot of it is, for me at least, just getting the questions answered and knowing like what are the important questions I need to have answered, and knowing like, okay, what are the assumptions and trade-offs I'm making here, when I'm suggesting this, and being kind of explicit about those trade-offs. So that when it comes time that, hey, these things are no longer, like, this isn't scaling, or this is hard to maintain, or just like a simple example, we need to replace this process builder with a trigger, right? We know like, okay, we're going to need to replace it when we start you know having batch integrations into this object, or when we have more than X number of concurrent users creating and updating records, things like that. So it's just knowing the trade-offs and I think planning for that. Right. So it looks like we're about at time, though I'm happy to stay on and answer more questions if people have them. If anybody has some last questions, we can do another round here, and then kind of, if I'm always happy to chat about CTA stuff, so don't hesitate to drop me a line.